So, what are Iran and the United States up to again? They knelt down and asked for a truce. According to the White House, Iran is no longer insisting on its original 10 demands. This is something that remains to be seen, because when it comes to what the White House says, it's usually not entirely reliable, since tomorrow the White House could start saying something completely different. After all, the White House has already won this war about 300 times, and right after that, they started yelling to open up the damn Strait of Hormuz. And then Carlson was angry. However, this is a slightly different topic. Today we're going to talk about what this war is doing to global trade, but mainly how through this war Iran has become much tougher, much more successful, much more respected, and much more significant for the world, for global geopolitics than it has been until now. Because Iran may not have a nuclear weapon, maybe it's not even capable of making one, and maybe whenever it gets close, Netanyahu comes and bombs it. Maybe it never even got close. Netanyahu just always wanted to bomb it. Well, in short, it's good that Iran hasn't been able to acquire a nuclear weapon so far. But it discovered something a little different than a nuclear weapon. Something a little different, through which it positions itself not as a world superpower, but as someone who can have an impact on the global market, on global economies, and on all our lives about as much as if it were a world superpower. Because, of course, the first point needs to be repeated, namely that when the Americans attacked Iran, not only did they fail to change the regime, but they also caused the regime to become more unified and allowed the most radical elements to come to power. The people in Iran who said that negotiations should be held with the United States, that there should be some kind of negotiations with Israel, and that there was no need to go down the path of war, these people are now considered absolute lunatics. Absolute idiots. They are completely sidelined from power. And those who have come to power are the ones who from the beginning said that Israel, the little Satan, must be destroyed, and that the United States, the great Satan, should also be destroyed, but unfortunately it's far away. These people were proven right when Israel and the United States attacked Iran, after they fabricated their own ideas about the danger of Iran, and these two attacked Iran at a time when negotiations were taking place. They were sitting at the negotiating table, drinking tea or something like that, and suddenly shooting started. So at this moment, not only did the United States fail to change the regime, but what the United States actually managed to do was to strengthen and reinforce the regime, and on top of that, they managed to school it in the most extreme way possible. And by that, I don't mean educated in old cultural texts, no. They managed to educate it in the art of war in an extreme way. In the art of war in the sense that they told them, look, you're at war with a global military superpower. The United States plus Israel plus, of course, some Arab states joined in as well. You are at war, dear Iran, with a global superpower, and you're squeezing it by the balls. You're showing it that you won't break. You're showing it that your army and your ability to fight are so strong that you can keep them in check. You can keep Israel, the United States, Europeans, and all of Asia in check. And you can turn the strongest allies in NATO against each other. You can do all of this. So the Americans taught Iran how much power they have, and they taught Iran that their doctrine of semi-terrorist warfare is an effective thing. It's an effective thing that has its influence. It has its place on the modern battlefield. Besides that, of course, not only did the Americans educate Iran, but the Americans also educated China and Russia. They educated everyone who might want to be friends with Iran in some way, that Iran is not a burden, that Iran has the ability to play a very, very good and strong geopolitical game. And now I'm getting to what lets Iran play such a strong game and how it does it. What enabled Iran to rise into the ranks of the world powers? What allows Iran to absolutely bully the whole world? That damned Hormuz Strait. Iran has long relied on the Hormuz Strait as its ace up its sleeve, but it never really knew if it would work. And thanks to the American war, it got to test it out. And it found out that it works. And it works maybe even better than it ever imagined. It found out that it's enough to send a few drones. It found out that it's enough to send a few missiles. It found out that it's enough to bomb oil and gas refineries and warehouses and extraction sites. And suddenly the world is screwed. Suddenly the world is motivated to push for anyone attacking Iran to stop. And moreover, not only did Iran find out that it can use Hormuz more effectively than it could ever use a nuclear weapon, Iran also found out that no one has the power to change that. At the same time, it found out that if it now demands money, protection payments, basically tolls for passage, there's a theoretical possibility that it could actually get away with it. And this is something that's really on the level of great power and superpower influence over the entire planet. Because if Iran decides to block Hormuz, then gasoline will get more expensive for you in the Czech Republic. Then life will get more expensive for everyone on this planet. Iran is holding us by the balls in a vice, and they can squeeze it like this anytime they want. They'll be able to collect tolls because they found out that the countries are paying them. They tried it, justified it with the war, and the countries are paying them. So not only are they acting as a superpower on the whole world, but through their superpower influence, they're also setting trends and determining what can happen. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is an extremely dangerous thing, because Hormuz is not the only place that, thanks to this Iranian trend, could be used in the future to hold the world by the balls. Let's now take a look at those places that could be used to squeeze the world or some very significant player by the balls. So we can start, for example, right here in our country, Denmark, the Baltic Sea. Here, of course, it's about the fact that the Danes and Swedes can close off the straits and canals present here and all these things. Not straits, canals. Straits are natural, canals are artificial. However, they can close those straits and thus effectively cut Russia off from the world market, especially when it comes to ports like Primorsk, St. Petersburg, and places like that. Which, of course, could lead to, for example, if you close this, it will lead to an increase in gas prices worldwide. However, at the same time, it will mean that the Russians won't be able to export gas through this northern route. And here they have large gas terminals, which would really hurt them if they couldn't export anything from them. The same goes for Kaliningrad, an extremely important naval base for the Baltic Fleet. If this area were closed off and they couldn't operate in the North Sea and couldn't leave that Baltic pond, it would obviously be problematic for them as well. Therefore, that's something we could do, and it's one of the things that until now wasn't exactly unthinkable, but it was something that seemed a bit further away than it is now, when we've realized that this kind of closure is actually happening and nobody is really able to do much about it. Yeah, so that could happen. Besides that, of course, we have the Channel, the English Channel, and even the English Channel, if France or Britain wanted to, could serve as a place where quite a lot of trade and quite a lot of maritime traffic could get stuck. But those are more like places where it's very, very unlikely. But when is it more likely? What do you need to threaten? What could happen for more trade to get stuck? Or where else could you choke it? Then, of course, the Suez Canal. About 10% of the world's maritime trade and 22% of container maritime trade passes through the Suez Canal. 22% of goods in container ships pass through the Suez Canal. This is a place where, of course, it's not a natural choke point because it's a man-made structure, but if Egypt wanted to, they could easily restrict it in some way. Of course, they would lose some money, but at this spot, they can really hold world trade by the balls. Another place where something similar could happen is the Panama Canal. 3% of global maritime trade passes through the Panama Canal. 3%. That may not seem like much, but it's still 3% of global trade. Okay? There's also the Strait of Hormuz, where that situation could easily recur at any time. For example, you have the Bab al-Mandab Strait, which connects the Gulf of Aden and the Arabian Sea with the Red Sea, and it's actually kind of a gateway to the Suez Canal. Yeah, it's kind of a gateway to the Suez Canal. And of course, if there were bigger forces here than the Houthis, for example, even this place could become a point where tolls start being collected. We're very lucky that in Yemen, at this place, at most a few Houthis or a few terrorists can cause trouble, and that there's not a really strong state here that could take advantage of this spot to blackmail everyone else and collect money. Besides that, we're lucky that Djibouti is here, which is basically a military base for all the major powers, precisely so that this place can't be used as some kind of local toll collection point, a place where things get stuck and so on. But if this situation changed, if, for example, Eritrea or Ethiopia or other countries like Somalia and so on started to grow more, or launched some bigger military expansion or initiative, then through this place, through this strait, they could start making money. And in the same way, this strait could be used as something to blackmail the world. Because 12% of maritime oil trade and 8% of the world's LNG trade flows through the Bab al-Mandab. And of course, everything that goes to Suez also passes through here. So, of course, it all adds up. So actually, even 10% of the world's maritime trade and 22% of container trade flows through this place. Another place, if we go a little further from Suez, here we have the Bosporus and the Dardanelles, which are, of course, straits between the Black Sea, the Aegean Sea, and the Sea of Marmara, which are effectively controlled by the Turks. And that's a place where, of course, not an extreme amount of goods flows through. After all, it's mainly connected to Russia and Ukraine and these places, Bulgaria, Romania, which simply aren't the biggest producers of goods and products. But what's important is that quite a lot of oil flows through here. 2.5 million barrels of oil flow through the Bosporus and Dardanelles every day. And that's obviously something that, if it started being used the way Iran uses it, could make things more expensive again. And the Turks, when they see that Iran is lining its pockets in the Strait of Hormuz, might start wondering why they couldn't start lining their own pockets at the Bosporus and Dardanelles. On top of that, they'd have the advantage of being part of NATO, so nobody would dare to mess with them easily. Sure, the North Atlantic Alliance has a commitment to keep the sea lanes open, but the moment the world order starts to crumble like this, commitments can be broken and rules can be bent. That's just clear. Then there's another place, and that's Gibraltar. That's the elephant in my room, Gibraltar. A place that has already been closed a few times due to the movement of tectonic plates, but it could also be closed for political reasons, or at least disrupted for political reasons. It could be by Morocco, it could be by a radically leftist Spain, right? After all, nobody really knows what could happen. Spain is really going wild right now. And Morocco, well, Morocco is Morocco. Anything can happen there too. And Gibraltar, that's a place through which 45% of the world's maritime oil trade passes, 42% for propane, 26% of car trade, and 23% of container shipping trade. So Gibraltar is extremely important for trade. And guys, disrupting this, bombing this, or collecting tolls from this, that would be a gold mine. That would be a gold mine. And then, of course, we also have Asia here, and Asia is, of course, extremely important. For example, here we have the strait in Thailand. Sorry, damn, I just completely forgot which country that is. No, Singapore, right? Singapore. But Malaysia, not Thailand, Malaysia. So, sorry, I apologize, that's embarrassing. Yeah, here we have the Strait of Malacca. Through the Strait of Malacca, 29% of the world's oil trade and maritime trade passes. Yeah, 29% goes through the Strait of Malacca here around Singapore and around Malaysia. So that's another bottleneck where you could easily collect tolls if someone wanted to, and it wouldn't really be much of an issue, you know. Of course, Singapore might complain or something, but the problem is that on one side there's Malaysia, on the other side there's Malaysia. Everywhere here is Malaysia, and they could really profit from it. Alternatively, it could cause problems if something happened there. And when we're talking about the problems that can happen if something goes on, well, this strait, if you will, this strait between Taiwan and mainland China, it's an extremely, extremely important place. 20% of the world's maritime trade flows through there. Another place you can easily block, easily charge fees for, or easily mess up if you were to get into some kind of military conflict. Plus, of course, there are plenty of gaps here between the Korean and Japanese republics. Overall, Japan has places here that it could easily charge fees for, and so on and so forth. That's something that's extremely, extremely risky, because as humanity, we've agreed to maintain free shipping lanes that will just let maritime trade flow. Because when maritime trade flows, when the spices flow, we all get richer. But the moment someone here, some people, start abusing the fact that they have influence over some of these shipping lanes, it can trigger a cascading effect where others will also want to have more influence over their own shipping lanes and will focus on short-term profit instead of long-term gain, instead of long-term interests. And they'll abuse it even more when you start putting military pressure on them. Because then they'll think, look, if I let it be open, we all get richer, but I don't care about anyone when you're dropping bombs on me right now. So the point is that many countries can be inspired by Iran right now and say, wow, maybe right now we're more interested in short-term profit, because maybe we have some geopolitical issue, we have a budget problem, we just have some problem that we can take advantage of. For example, the problem that Russia has right now. So, Russia has a problem in that it's weakening geopolitically, and theoretically it might want to mess up the West and the global economy to improve its own position. And it could do that, for example, through Madagascar, because in Madagascar, the Russians are gaining a very, very strong position. They supply weapons there, they provide training, and they have a lot of influence there. And of course, between Madagascar and Mozambique, through the Mozambique Channel, quite a lot of trade flows as well. And of course, there used to be a problem with piracy here, and it still exists. But if the Russians escalated, and if the Russians wanted to, they could, for example, use Madagascar as a place through which they could choke the Mozambique Channel, and all these places. So even this is a reason why Iran is basically a world power at this moment. Because not only can it hold the whole world by the balls, not only did it manage not to lose a war against the United States, but on top of that, it's starting to set the trend that countries use natural straits to enrich themselves and screw over others. Now for the second elephant in the room, which we definitely need to discuss. And that is, yes, those straits and canals are used mainly because it's the most efficient way. If, for example, Malaysia started charging tolls in its Malacca Strait, then trade could simply be redirected in some way. But what's important? When trade starts to be redirected, it usually leads to longer shipping routes. Because the shipping route goes through these narrow points for the reason that it's the most advantageous. When it's redirected, it stops being so advantageous, so everything becomes more expensive. Then theoretically, if it's redirected, trade could be open again. But that would bring instability into the trade again, and instability makes things more expensive. Effectively, it seems to me that if we can't actually manage here, if we can't stop this kind of abuse of these things, then everything will get more expensive for us again, and we'll all just end up poorer. With less globalization, the economy will be less globalized, which is a wonderful prospect, and I hope this trend doesn't happen. However, it's something that Iran, with significant help from Israel and the United States, can set in motion. This trend can be started, and it won't be good. It won't be good for our wallets. That's what's important. So that's it. Let me know in the comments what you think about it. Give a like if you enjoy the content, and I'll see you again next time. Here, through the QR code, you can support this content, this independent media content, just like they do in developed civilizations. And yeah, check out the streams. I'll see you next time. Hey there. And today here on Friday at 4:30 p.m., the podcast Warmongers. So be there too. See you.